Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another WIE podcast. This is your host, Stephanie Alexandric. For today's episode, it's time for a history lesson on women in engineering in Canada and at Western University. So stay tuned to learn more about some female engineering pioneers. One thing myself and fellow executive members are deciding is what we should rename the Women in Engineering podcast. If you have any suggestions, please leave an answer in the poll that's attached to the Spotify or leave a comment on the YouTube video. When I had decided to go into engineering and as I entered my first year of university, I did not know really that much about women in engineering, either than I was one and that there weren't many of us. It wasn't until I started participating in this club's events that I really started to learn about some really influential and significant female engineers. I wanted to start this history lesson off by talking about Elizabeth or Elsie McGill, who was the first practicing female engineer in Canada. Elsie was born in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1905, and her mother, Helen, was a pioneer, as she was the first woman to receive a bachelor's degree in music in England and was the first female appointed judge in British Columbia. Elsie's father was a lawyer and journalist, so both parents' interests in law actually influenced Elsie and did lead her to her interest in feminism. Elsie went to the University of British Columbia for applied sciences for 2 years before she enrolled in the University of Toronto in 1923. She graduated in 1927 and began working at an automobile company. However, shortly after that, Elsie enrolled in the Aeronautical Master's program at the University of Michigan, and she became the first female to graduate in that discipline in the world. Around this time, Elsie was also diagnosed with polio. While she was recovering from the disease, she was already drafting aircraft designs and writing articles. She also began to join feminist groups, including the Canadian Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. Even through the Great Depression, Elsie worked in the aeronautical industry and eventually became the chief aeronautical engineer at Canadian Car and Foundry, now called CanCar, where she led large projects, including the mass production of the Hawker Hurricane fighter plane that was used in World War II. In 1938, the Engineering Institute of Canada accepted Elsie's application and she became the first woman professional member. Elsie continued to work as an aeronautic engineer while challenging government policies and advocating for women. She was highly involved in many feminist groups and continuously advocated for women's abilities to be engineers and not just engineering assistants. She sadly passed away in 1980, but she left the world inspiring many women to become engineers themselves. I think it is crazy to think that Elsie graduated from her engineering degree a bit under 100 years ago. Definitely, engineering has been around for a long time, much longer than that. So it's kind of a bit unfathomable that we haven't been involved in the process that much, at least as significant engineering players. But I'm very glad that we are in the place that we are now. While there are still some barriers to entry today for women and other minority groups to get involved in engineering, the progress that has been made since when Elsie had enrolled in engineering, it's pretty significant. Speaking of another first, let us meet Vicky Fecteau, or previously Vicki Wheeler. She was the first female to graduate engineering at Western University. In her graduating class, she was the only female out of 51 students. Vicky graduated mechanical engineering in 1966 and ended up working for IBM as a systems engineer for 26 years. I've been able to track down Vicky through another engineering student, thank you, Julia, and I'll be interviewing Vicky soon. So stay tuned for an upcoming podcast where we'll actually get to meet Vicky for a one-on-one interview. Something to keep in mind while we're listening to all of these inspirational stories is that these women all started at similar places that we are all at this point. And that if we set our minds to what exactly we want to achieve in life and we work hard, these things are obtainable. Now, it's not going to be an easy path. And if you talk to any of these women, if you could, some of them are no longer with us, they would say the same thing. It definitely takes effort to get to these places and to achieve the kind of achievements that these women have done and future achievements, but it's worth it. Next up, we have Claudette McKay Lassonde, who was the first female PEO president in 1986. Claudette was born in Montreal and attended the University of Montreal for a bachelor's in chemical engineering. She later did a master's in nuclear engineering, and she worked as a nuclear engineer before becoming Director of Education Relations for Northern Telecom Canada. Claudette was a passionate advocate for women in engineering, where she was a founding member for various groups and conferences, including the Women in Engineering and Science, WiSE, and participated in other engineering councils such as NSERC. Now, Claudette's name may sound familiar to a few of you, as one of our buildings, CMLP, is named after her. The Claudette Family Foundation made a large contribution to the building of CMLP, and so it was named after her. A fun fact is that Claudette's son, Christian, attended Western and graduated engineering in 1997. Sadly, Claudette passed away at 51 from cancer, but her contributions continue to make impacts on the lives of current and future female engineers. Another famous Canadian female engineer is Julie Payette. Julie Payette is largely known for her career as an astronaut and as being the 29th Governor General of Canada. Julie was born in Montreal, Canada in 1963, where she attended McGill University for electrical engineering, and she graduated in 1986. She then attended the University of Toronto for a master's in computer engineering. After that, Julie worked for IBM and Bell Northern Research. Shortly after, Julie was selected to join the Canadian Space Agency, CSA, where she was a contributor to the Canadarm2 for the International Space Station, ISS. She ended up doing astronaut training at NASA and went on to her first flight to space to the ISS in 1999. Julie ended up serving as the chief astronaut from the CSA from 2000 to 2007, overseeing various missions installing equipment at the ISS. She retired from the CSA in 2013 and had a few other leadership positions before being elected as the Governor General by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2017. In 2020, allegations came out that there was a toxic work environment created in the Governor General's office. Julie ended up resigning from her position as Governor General in 2021. The reason why I included this part is because it's important to be truthful about people's pasts. Even with all the successes and achievements Julie has had within her career, it can be seen that she is obviously not perfect and has her own interpersonal issues to work through. Right now is an excellent time to remind everyone about some good rules for working with others. Respect, communication, trust, constructive feedback, etc., etc. If you're in first year starting your design course, or if you're in your last year working on capstone, take a look at the link posted in the description regarding ground rules for teams that can be helpful to keep in mind and implement within your own groups. Lastly, you may be wondering how the Women in Engineering Student Club came to be at Western. The Women in Engineering Club was created in 1989 to increase female enrollment in engineering. This was about the same time that NSERC appointed a chair for women in science and engineering to promote the involvement and retention of females in those industries. Going from one female graduating engineering in 1966 to today, where the WiE Club has around 200 members enrolled and many more female identifying engineering students within the faculty, there's great progress that is being made at Western and at other Ontario engineering schools as well. In an article released by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, or OSPE, there are three main barriers to entry for females into STEM. They include cultural bias and discrimination, lack of mentorship in early stages of career, and pay equity. One thing they didn't mention explicitly in the article, but is an important focus for various women in engineering clubs, is creating role models that will be mentors for younger female engineers or students, as well as promoting the profession to young girls as a feasible and rewarding career. This focus translates into a couple campaigns our club is involved with, which includes the Big Sister Little Sister program for first-year girls, as well as participating in mentoring programs run by the faculty, including Go Code Girl, Go Eng Girl, and Eng Squad mentorship. If any of these programs interest you, you can reach out to us on social media and we'll be able to get you connected with the right people. If you're interested in learning more about any of the women that we talked about, or any of the programs and initiatives that were mentioned in this podcast, please take a look in the description where I've listed all of the relevant links that I had used. That concludes our podcast today, discussing some memorable women making an impact in the engineering world. Do you see yourself working in similar fields as them, or are you inspired to achieve your own set of goals? I'll let you sleep on that. Until next time, Western Engineering.